Steve Cropper wasn't the kind of musician who chased fame, but today, the entire music world is talking about him. Because the legendary guitarist behind Green Onions, In the Midnight Hour, and Dock of the Bay has passed away at the age of 84, leaving behind a legacy so big that even people who don't know his name still know his sound. It all happened quietly in Nashville. On Wednesday, his family shared the heartbreaking news: Steve was gone. He had been recovering in a rehab facility after a recent fall, but even there, he was working on new music. His longtime friend Eddie Gore visited him just a day earlier and said Steve was smiling, talking about ideas, and still full of the same gentle energy he had carried his whole life. Nobody expected the end to come so soon, but to understand the weight of this loss, you have to know the story of who Steve Cropper really was. He was born in Missouri, raised in Memphis, and got his first guitar at just 14. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to be a star. But the moment he walked into Stax Records, everything changed. At just 20 years old, he became part of a tiny, unknown label that would later define soul music. One afternoon, Steve was messing around in the studio with Booker T, Jones, Donald Duck, Dunn, and Al Jackson. No pressure, no plan, just for young musicians having fun. Within minutes, they created a piece of music that would change everything: Green Onions. A track that became a worldwide sensation and put Stax Records on the map. And just like that, Steve Cropper's sound became the heartbeat of Memphis's soul. Steve didn't dominate songs, he shaped them quietly. His guitar riffs were sharp, simple, and unforgettable. Keith Richards once called him perfect. Joe Bonamassa said, "If you haven't heard his name, you've heard his playing." And that couldn't be more true, because when Otis Redding, Wilson, Pickett, Sam, and Dave, Eddie Floyd, all these legends walked into the studio, it was Steve Cropper behind them, building the foundation of their biggest hits. But the most emotional chapter of his life came in 1967. Steve and Otis Redding had just written and recorded Sittin' On the Dock of the Bay. Days later, Otis died in a tragic plane crash. Steve was shattered. Yet he finished the song alone, still grieving, shaping it into the masterpiece that became a one hit. That was Steve Quiet. Dedicated and completely devoted to the music. Even after leaving Stax in 1970, his journey didn't stop. In the late 70s, he suddenly became a pop culture icon when John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd pulled him into the Blues Brothers band. If you've ever watched the Blues Brothers movie, that calm, long-haired guitarist in sunglasses, that was Steve Cropper. He toured the world, recorded hit albums, performed with Bob Dylan, Neil Young, John Fogerty, the list goes on. And even in his later years, he never slowed down. In 2024, he released a Grammy-nominated album. Earlier this year, he received the Tennessee Governor's Arts Award. He was working, performing, and creating until the very end, his family said. Steve touched millions of lives, and he will live forever through his music. And that's true. Because whether you know his name or not, Steve Cropper shaped the soundtrack of an entire era. His guitar built the sound of soul. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need fame. His music was his voice, and that voice will never fade. Rest in peace, Steve Cropper. A quiet legend. A gentle soul. A guitarist whose work will echo across generations.